The Galactic Council met in a great hall made of shimmering crystal that floated above the clouds of Xylos Prime. This place was known across the stars as a neutral ground where beings from over 200 different worlds came to talk, not fight. The air hummed with soft energy, and the light bent in strange, gentle ways through the walls, casting rainbows on the smooth floors. Delegates sat in wide circles, each representing their species with calm dignity. Most wore robes of deep color or armor polished to a mirror shine. Some had many eyes, others none at all. Some spoke with voices, others with pulses of light or scent. But all followed the same rule. No violence, only words. In the far corner of the chamber, near the edge where the floor seemed to drop into endless sky, sat Daniel Carter. He was the only human there. His clothes were plain, a simple gray tunic and dark trousers, no medals, no glowing symbols. He looked small among the towering insectoid Threll, the floating gelatinous forms of the Mirov, and the armored reptilian delegates from the Outer Rim. For over 50 years, Earth had been watched but not welcomed. After their near self-destruction in the late 21st century, the Council had placed humanity under a quiet quarantine. They were allowed to explore their own solar system, but not beyond, not until they proved they could handle peace without tearing themselves apart. Now Daniel sat with his hands folded, listening. The topic of the day was serious. The Krell hegemony, a powerful empire from the Scorpius arm, had just seized the Varelian system. The Varelians were gentle beings who lived on floating islands in a gas giant's upper atmosphere. They grew light fruit and sang songs that could calm solar flares. They had no weapons, no armies, no concept of conquest, and now their home was under Krell control. The hegemony claimed it was for resource stability and regional order, but everyone knew the truth. The Krell wanted the Varelians' bioluminescent forests, which could power starships for decades without fuel. Most council members argued for sanctions. "We should freeze their trade routes," said the silver-robed delegate from the Quarren Concord. "Or revoke their access to the Nexus gates," added the many-limbed speaker from the Gal Collective. Others suggested sending observers or drafting a strongly worded resolution. No one spoke of war. War was outdated, barbaric, a relic of younger, angrier species. The Council prided itself on solving problems with patience, logic, and time. Then the Grand Arbiter, a tall, ageless being named Orlan Vex, with skin like polished obsidian, turned to Daniel. "Ambassador Carter," he said, his voice low and resonant, "Earth has remained silent on this matter. What is your position?" All eyes turned to the human, some with curiosity, most with mild disinterest. What could a species that had barely left its cradle say about galactic affairs? Daniel stood slowly. He was not tall, not imposing, but something in his stance made the room grow quieter. He did not raise his voice. He did not gesture dramatically. He simply looked at the Arbiter and said, "We're going to fight." The words hung in the air like a stone dropped into still water. Ripples of shock spread instantly. A Threll delegate twitched all 6 of its antennae. The Mirov bubble nearby pulsed a deep violet, their sign of alarm. Even Orlan Vex blinked, a rare display of surprise from one so composed. "Fight?" repeated the Quarren delegate, as if testing the word on his tongue. "You mean militarily?" "Yes," Daniel said. "But humans have no fleet," said a reptilian envoy from the Zarn hegemony, his scales clicking in disbelief. "Your last recorded vessel was a research probe that barely reached your own moon's orbit." "That was the official record," Daniel replied. "Not the full one," murmurs broke out. Some delegates leaned toward their translation orbs, certain they had misheard. Others stared at Daniel as if he had suddenly grown fangs. Fighting was not done, not here. Not by anyone, least of all by Earth, a planet still healing from its own wounds, still learning to share water and power among its billions. Orlan Vex raised a hand, and silence returned. "Explain yourself, Ambassador. The Council does not take talk of violence lightly." Daniel took a breath. "The Varelians didn't ask for this. They never hurt anyone. The Krell are taking their home, their children, their songs, and we're sitting here talking about trade bans? That won't stop them. Sanctions won't bring back what's lost. Words won't shield the innocent." He paused, then added, "Humans know what it's like to lose everything. We've burned our own cities. We've poisoned our own seas. But we also know how to stand up when it matters. Not because we love war, but because sometimes peace must be defended." A long silence followed. No one moved. Even the ambient hum of the hall seemed to lower its pitch. The idea that a species so recently deemed unstable, so emotionally unpredictable, would choose to act, alone, without council approval, was unthinkable. And yet there it was, a human, calm and certain, saying what no one else dared. Finally, a small voice came from the back. It was HFY War, the Xanthari envoy. His kind were known for their logic, their cold clarity. "You understand," he said slowly, "that if you attack the Krell without council sanction, you will be labeled aggressors. You could be expelled. Your world could be blockaded." Daniel met his gaze. "Then let them blockade us. But while they're arguing over rules, we'll be saving lives." The session ended soon after, not with a vote, but with stunned silence. Delegates filed out slowly, glancing back at the human who still stood in his plain clothes, looking out the crystal wall at the swirling clouds below. Some whispered that Earth had finally gone mad. Others wondered if madness was the only sane response to cruelty. Back in his quarters, Daniel activated a secure channel. A face appeared on the screen. Elena Ruiz, captain of the Odyssey, her eyes sharp, her expression ready. "They know now," he said. "Good," she replied. "The fleet's been waiting." Outside, the twin suns of Xylos Prime dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in red and gold. Somewhere far away in the cold dark between stars, human ships powered up their engines. They had no grand banners, no war chants, just a simple mission: protect those who could not protect themselves. And for the first time in centuries, the galaxy would learn what humanity truly was. Not just dreamers or destroyers, but defenders. News of Daniel Carter's words spread through the galaxy like a solar flare. On 1,000 worlds, beings who had never given Earth a second thought now whispered about the strange, soft-skinned species that dared to speak of war in a hall of peace. But on Earth itself there was no whispering. There was only action. In Houston, Marcus Bell stood in a dim room deep beneath the old NASA complex. The walls were lined with screens showing star maps, ship diagnostics, and live feeds from orbital docks. He wore a faded blue jumpsuit and chewed on the end of a stylus, his eyes scanning data streams that would have overwhelmed most minds. Marcus wasn't a soldier. He was an engineer, a problem solver. But today his problems had names like plasma core stability and hyperspace jump calibration. For 20 years, he and thousands like him had worked in secret, building something the galaxy thought impossible: a human defense fleet. It wasn't flashy. The ships had no glowing runes or towering spires. They were sleek gray, built for function, not show, hidden in asteroid belts, buried under lunar regolith, tucked into the shadow of Jupiter's moons. They waited. Now the order had come. Activate Project Aegis. Those 3 words unlocked decades of preparation. Factories that once made solar panels now forged armor plating. Universities that taught poetry also ran war simulations. Farmers in Nebraska grew crops not just for food, but for biofuel refined into ship-grade energy. In Chicago, Lena Ortiz stood on the roof of a repurposed research lab, watching drones zip through the evening sky like fireflies. She had spent her life studying ocean currents and coral reefs, but when the call came, she didn't hesitate. Her knowledge of fluid dynamics made her perfect for designing maneuver algorithms for fighter craft. Now she coordinated with teams in Jakarta, Cape Town, and Santiago, linking minds across time zones to build a network no single species could replicate. Humans didn't just build ships, they built connections. Across the planet, ordinary people stepped into extraordinary roles. A retired schoolteacher in Lisbon stitched medical kits with steady hands. A teenager in Nairobi coded firewall patches that fooled Krell surveillance drones. A baker in Buenos Aires packed high-calorie rations into vacuum-sealed packs, each one labeled with a handwritten note: "Stay strong." No one was forced. No one was paid extra. They simply did what needed doing because it was right. The Galactic Council watched in disbelief. Their long-range sensors picked up unusual energy signatures near Mars, strange construction activity in the Kuiper Belt, encrypted signals bouncing between Earth's continents at impossible speeds. HFY War, the Xanthari envoy, requested an emergency briefing. He stood before the council once more, his voice tight with confusion. Earth is mobilizing. Not just talking, building, training, deploying. Their entire civilization is shifting focus in days. How? No one had an answer. Other species took generations to change course. Humans did it over a weekend. Back on Earth, the Unified Defense Coalition held its first full assembly in a bunker beneath the Rocky Mountains. Generals, scientists, teachers, pilots, and farmers sat at the same table. There were no titles, only roles. Captain Elena Ruiz stood at the head, her uniform crisp, her eyes tired but clear. "We don't have the numbers," she said. "We don't have the history. But we have something they don't expect, unity." She explained the plan. The Krell thought Earth was weak because it was divided. They didn't know that humans had spent centuries learning to come together in crisis. Floods, fires, pandemics, they had faced them all, not as nations, but as neighbors. Now that same instinct would carry them to the stars. Marcus Bell joined the call from Houston. "The Odyssey is ready," he said. "All systems green. She'll jump in 48 hours. Lena Ortiz added, "Our drone swarms can blind their sensors for up to 7 minutes. That's all we need." A young pilot named Jake Morrison, barely 22, spoke next. "I've run the approach 100 times in sim. I know the blind spots in their dreadnoughts. We can hit their reactor vents before they even see us." There was no boasting, only facts. No fear, only focus. Meanwhile, on Xylos Prime, the council debated what to do. Some wanted to condemn Earth, others feared provoking the Krell further. But a few, like Kale Vor, began to wonder if humanity wasn't reckless but necessary. "They call it defense," he told a fellow envoy late one night. "But it looks like courage." The Krell, for their part, laughed. Their scouts reported human activity, but their commanders dismissed it. "Monkeys playing with fire," said High Marshal Drock, his voice dripping with scorn. "Let them come. We will crush them and add their bones to our victory spires." They did not know that human bones had already rebuilt cities after earthquakes, walked on the moon, and carried life through ice ages. They did not know that humans did not fight to win glory, but to protect the quiet moments, a child's laugh, a shared meal, a song at dusk. As the hours ticked down, Earth grew still. Not silent, but focused. In homes, people hugged their families a little tighter. In schools, children wrote letters to pilots they'd never meet. In hospitals, doctors double-checked supplies, knowing that soon the wounded would come home. Elena Ruiz stood on the bridge of the Odyssey, her hand resting on the command console. Outside the viewport, Earth hung in the blackness, blue, fragile, alive. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived a war on that very planet and who once told her, "You don't fight because you hate the enemy. You fight because you love what's behind you." That was the heart of it, not rage, not pride, love. And so, as the final countdown began, humanity did not roar. They did not chant or swear oaths. They simply turned their faces toward the stars and moved as one. Farmers, teachers, engineers, pilots, they were no longer just Earthlings. They were guardians. The Krell would learn soon enough that the most dangerous species in the galaxy wasn't the one with the biggest guns or the oldest empire. It was the one that had everything to lose and still chose to stand. The human fleet emerged from hyperspace not with a roar, but with silence. One moment, the space around the Varelian gas giant was empty. The next, 37 ships hung in the void like shadows given form. At their center floated the Odyssey, Earth's first true warship, its hull scarred from secret trials but its engines burning steady. Captain Elena Ruiz stood on the bridge, her hands clasped behind her back, eyes fixed on the Krell armada blocking the upper atmosphere where the Varelians lived. The Krell had 3 dreadnoughts, each longer than a city, bristling with ion cannons and shield emitters. They floated like sleeping beasts, confident, unaware. Their scouts had seen nothing. Their sensors detected no incoming fleet. Humans had used old tricks, magnetic masking, cold runs, and drone decoys launched weeks earlier, to slip through the dark unseen. Now they were inside the enemy's perimeter. "Launch swarms," Elena said. From the Odyssey's belly, thousands of small drones poured out like a cloud of steel insects. They moved in perfect sync, guided by algorithms Lena Ortiz had refined using ocean current models. Within seconds, they surrounded the nearest Krell dreadnought, pulsing with electromagnetic noise. The massive ship's sensors flickered and died. Alarms blared across its bridge, but it was too late. "Chicago Gambit," Elena whispered. It was a maneuver named after a battle fought centuries ago on Earth, where outnumbered fighters used confusion and speed to win. Now it played out among the stars. Human fighters, small, fast, built for agility, darted from the drone cloud. Piloted by volunteers like Jake Morrison, they targeted weak points, coolant vents, shield relays, communication arrays. They didn't aim to destroy the whole ship, just to blind it, cripple it, make it vulnerable. The first dreadnought shuddered as its main reactor overheated. Smoke poured from its hull. The second tried to turn, but its thrusters misfired. Marcus Bell's team had hacked its navigation logs days before, planting false data that now caused chaos. The third opened fire, but its shots went wild, hitting empty space where human ships had been seconds before. On the Krell command deck, High Marshal Drock roared in fury. "How?" he bellowed. "Monkeys do not outthink us." But humans weren't just thinking. They were feeling, adapting, improvising. When a Krell plasma beam sliced through a human corvette, the pilot didn't panic. She ejected, and her ship's last act was to crash into a Krell supply tender, taking it down in a silent explosion of fire and ice. Back on Earth, billions watched the feed. Not live, there was too much distance, but delayed by minutes. In homes, streets, and shelters, people held their breath. In Nairobi, a group of children huddled around a cracked tablet, eyes wide. In Oslo, an old man whispered a prayer he hadn't spoken in 50 years. In Mumbai, a factory worker paused his shift, staring at the sky as if he could see the battle himself. The Varelians, floating in their sky islands, felt the shift in the air. Their songs grew stronger, not in fear, but in hope. They had never known war, but they knew kindness. And now, strangers from a distant blue world were bleeding for them. After 90 minutes, it was over. 2 Krell dreadnoughts drifted powerless. The third fled, its engines sputtering. The human fleet had lost 5 ships. 12 pilots were gone. Among them was Jake Morrison. His last transmission, calm and clear, reached Earth hours later. "Tell my mom I kept the garden watered." No one cried on the Odyssey. Not yet. There would be time for grief. Now there was work. Rescue teams launched to pull survivors from wreckage. Engineers patched hull breaches. Medics prepared for the wounded. Elena Ruiz stood alone for a moment on the observation deck, watching the Varelian clouds swirl below, soft and golden in the starlight. She thought of Jake, of his garden, of the quiet life he'd left behind to fight for beings he'd never met. On Xylos Prime, the Galactic Council watched the battle unfold through long-range sensors. They saw the precision, the sacrifice, the strange mix of cold strategy and raw heart. The Quarren delegates sat stunned. The Gal Collective envoy pulsed with nervous light. Even Orlin Vex, the Grand Arbiter, stood without speaking for a full minute. "They didn't ask for help," said a young Mirov aide, her voice trembling through scent waves. "They just did it." Cale Vore watched the replay of the Chicago Gambit 3 times. Each time he saw something new, not just tactics but trust. The human pilots moved like a single mind, covering each other, sacrificing position for the team. "They fight like they've done this before," he murmured. But their records say they haven't. He was right. Humans hadn't fought in space before, but they had fought in trenches, in jungles, in cities reduced to rubble. They knew loss. They knew courage. And now they were teaching the galaxy a lesson it had forgotten, that peace is not the absence of conflict but the presence of protectors. The Krell, humiliated, sent a message to the Council. Earth has broken galactic law. They must be punished, but the Council did not answer quickly. For the first time, doubt crept into their perfect order. Was it law to stand by while the helpless were crushed? Was peace worth anything if it meant silence in the face of cruelty? Meanwhile, the human fleet began repairs. They didn't celebrate. They didn't boast. They simply prepared for what came next. Because they knew the Krell would return, and next time they would come angrier, stronger, ready for war. But so would humanity. As the Odyssey's engines hummed back to life, Elena gave the order to hold position. They would guard the Varelians. They would stand watch. And if the Krell returned, they would meet them again. Not as monkeys, not as barbarians, but as defenders of the light. Far away on a quiet hill in Oregon, Daniel Carter received the battle report. He read Jake's last words, closed his eyes, and whispered, "Thank you." Then he turned to the stars and said nothing more. There was no need. The message was already written in fire and sacrifice across the sky. Victory came with a heavy silence. The human fleet held position above the Varelian clouds, but the cost weighed on every soul aboard. 12 names were added to the memorial wall on the Odyssey, etched in simple letters. Among them was Jake Morrison. His garden back in Ohio would go untended for a while, but neighbors had already stepped in, watering the tomatoes, pulling the weeds, leaving fresh bread on his mother's porch every Sunday. No one spoke much about it. They just did what needed doing. The Krell did not forget their shame. Within days, their response came, not with words, but with fire. They struck not at the fleet, but at the soft places. The Krell strike force appeared near Mars, targeting the orbital greenhouses that fed half the planet. Another hit the Titan research station, where scientists studied alien microbes and raised children in low gravity. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. 23 lives lost, homes shattered, silence broken, but Earth did not break. In the ruins of the Mars greenhouse, workers in patched suits salvaged seeds, planting them in emergency pods within hours. On Titan, survivors radioed home not with fear, but with resolve. "We're okay. Keep fighting." There was no panic, no blame, only quiet determination. That was the strange thing about humans. They did not fall apart when hit. They bent, they bled, but they held. In Iowa, farmers worked double shifts to grow extra grain for space rations. In Seoul, students stayed up all night rewriting code to harden Earth's orbital shields. In Buenos Aires, retirees trained as emergency medics, learning how to treat plasma burns and vacuum exposure. It wasn't heroism. It was habit. They had survived ice ages, plagues, wars on their own world. Now they faced the stars with the same stubborn will. The Krell expected fear. They got unity instead. On the Odyssey, Elena Ruiz reviewed damage reports. The ship had taken hits during the last battle, and repairs were slow. Marcus Bell sent updates from Houston. "We're rerouting power from non-essential systems. Life support is stable, weapons at 80%. His voice was calm, but she knew he hadn't slept in 3 days. None of them had. Lena Ortiz coordinated with Varelian elders who offered their bioluminescent moss, a natural energy source that could recharge human batteries faster than solar cells. It was a gift given freely. The Varelians had no weapons, but they had light. And now they shared it. Kelvor watched from afar. He had sent a small Xanthari observation vessel to the edge of the system, not to interfere but to understand. What he saw confused his logical mind. Humans mourned their dead, yes, but they also planted trees in their names. They held moments of silence, then returned to work. They cried in private, but stood tall in public. They do not hide their pain, he told his aide. They carry it forward. Even the council began to shift. The Quarren delegate, once loud in his criticism, now asked quiet questions. How do they organize so fast? The Gal Collective started sharing sensor data, small at first, then more. They were not allies yet, but they were no longer indifferent. Then came the unexpected. The Varelians, for the first time in their history, built warships. Not weapons of destruction, but vessels of defense, light, fast, wrapped in living vines that absorbed radiation. They painted Earth's blue and white symbol on their hulls. "You stood for us," their leader said through a translator. "Now we stand with you." Elena accepted their offer with a nod. No grand speech, just Yegor, welcome aboard. Back on Earth, Daniel Carter met with Kelvor in a quiet garden in Geneva. The Xanthari envoy walked slowly, his long limbs stiff with unfamiliar emotion. "Your people fight like they have nothing to lose," he said. Daniel looked at the cherry blossoms falling around them. "We've lost plenty," he said. "That's why we fight. Not for glory, not for land, for the chance to keep what matters, kindness, peace, a child's future." Kale was silent for a long time. Then he said, "My people believe emotion clouds judgment. But watching you, I wonder if it sharpens it." The war was changing. It was no longer just Earth versus the Krell. It was becoming something bigger, a test of what the galaxy valued. Order without justice? Or courage with compassion? One evening, as the sun set over the Pacific, a message came from the outer colonies. A Krell slave ship had been hijacked, not by soldiers but by its own captives, beings from a dozen species who had heard of Earth's stand. They used stolen comms to send a single word: hope. That word spread faster than any weapon. On the Odyssey, Jake's empty bunk remained untouched. But beside it, a new pilot, a young woman from Jakarta named Rena, placed a small stone from her home river. "For luck," she whispered. Then she strapped into her fighter and joined the next patrol. The Krell would come again. They had more ships, more firepower, more rage. But humanity had something they could not measure: the will of a species that had clawed its way back from the edge too many times to count. They knew darkness, and because of that, they protected the light fiercely. In hospitals, in factories, in classrooms, on farms, People worked not for victory, but for each other. That was the secret the galaxy had missed. Humans didn't fight alone. They fought together. And together, they were stronger than any empire. As stars blinked awake above Earth, a child in Lisbon asked her grandmother, "Will we win?" The old woman held her close. "We already are." The war did not end with a single battle or a grand explosion. It ended quietly like a storm that runs out of rain. The Krell hegemony, once feared across 3 spiral arms, began to crack from the inside. Their slave worlds, long silent, rose up. Their supply lines broke. Their commanders turned on each other, blaming failures on rivals. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth they could not crush. Hope had spread. It started with whispers. A factory worker on a Krell mining moon disabled a power core and escaped in a cargo pod. A pilot from a vassal species defected, bringing schematics of Krell shield frequencies. Then came open revolts on Varix on Solmara, on a dozen worlds where beings had once bowed their heads. They used human tactics: hit fast, vanish, protect the weak. They painted Earth's symbol on their banners, not as conquerors, but as allies. The Galactic Council watched in awe. What began as a reckless act by one small species had become a wave. Delegates who once called humans barbaric now asked for copies of their defense protocols. The Quarren Concord sent engineers to study human drone swarms. The Gal Collective offered docking rights at their stations. Even the Mirov, who rarely left their nebula, sent healing spores for wounded soldiers. Earth did not gloat. They shared everything: ship designs, medical data, even farming techniques for damaged worlds. Marcus Bell hosted virtual workshops for alien engineers. Lena Ortiz taught Varelian pilots how to read human flight patterns. Elena Ruiz met with rebel leaders, not as a commander, but as a partner. "We fight together," she said, "or not at all." On Xylos Prime, the council held a special session. This time there were no debates about sanctions or delays. Orlin Vex stood before the assembly and spoke words no one expected. The old ways failed. Peace built on silence is no peace at all. He proposed a new doctrine, one drafted with input from Earth. Active peace. It meant that protecting the innocent was not aggression, it was duty. And humanity, once barred from the stars, was granted a permanent seat on the Security Directorate. Daniel Carter accepted the honor not with pride, but with quiet thanks. He knew the real victory was not in titles, but in change. Across the galaxy, species once too afraid to speak now stood tall. A young Xanthari student wrote a thesis on human resilience. A Krell-born poet freed from slavery published verses about blue skies and gardens. The universe was learning to care again. Years passed. The scars of war faded, but the lessons remained. On a quiet hillside in Oregon, Daniel Carter stood beside Elena Ruiz and Marcus Bell. Below them, children played, human children, Varelian children, even a few young Xanthari, their forms shimmering in the sunlight. They chased each other through fields of wildflowers, laughing in a mix of languages and light pulses. Above them, 2 moons hung in the sky, Earth's old companion, and a new one, once a barren Krell outpost, now green with forests and filled with refugees rebuilding their lives. "They thought we were just another voice in the crowd," Elena said, watching a girl toss a glowing Varelian seed into the air like a ball. "No," Daniel replied. "We were the voice that finally said enough." Marcus kicked a stone with his boot. "Funny thing is, we didn't even plan it. We just saw something wrong and couldn't look away. That was the heart of it. Humans didn't seek war. They never had. But when faced with cruelty, they chose to act, not because they were strong, but because they remembered what it felt like to be weak." The Odyssey still flew, though now it carried scientists and teachers more than soldiers. Jake Morrison's name was carved into its memorial wall, but also into a school on Titan, a garden on Mars, and a peace center on Xylos Prime. His mother visited often, always bringing tomatoes from her backyard. She never spoke much, but her presence said everything. Cale Vor retired from the council and moved to Earth. He lived in a small house near the Oregon coast, where he learned to grow vegetables and watch sunsets. He often sat with Daniel, saying little, just sharing the quiet. Once he asked, "Do you think we'll ever need to fight again?" Daniel looked at the ocean. "Maybe, but next time we won't be alone," and he was right. The galaxy had changed. Species that once hid now trained together. Trade routes carried not just goods, but stories. Young beings from 100 worlds dreamed of joining Earth's Peace Corps, not for glory, but to help. One evening, as the twin moons rose, a new message arrived at the old Houston Command Center. It was from the far edge of known space. A young species barely spacefaring had been threatened by raiders. They had heard of Earth, they asked for help. Marcus read the message, then smiled. He typed a simple reply. We're on our way, no fanfare. No speeches. Just action, because that was who humans were. Not perfect. Not invincible. But always willing to stand up when others could not. And in doing so, they reminded the galaxy of something it had almost forgotten. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the choice to care more than you fear. As stars blinked awake above the quiet hill, the children's laughter drifted on the wind, a sound softer than engines, brighter than weapons and stronger than any empire, and somewhere in a garden on Earth a tomato ripened in the sun.